She thought she was buying a busted storage lot with rusted containers and leftover junk. No one believed in the purchase. Not her old boss, not the guy who sold it to her, not the friends who laughed when she said she used her entire savings. But the moment she cracked open the last shipping container, and sunlight hit the hood of a blue Porsche that shouldn't have even existed, the world stopped laughing, because buried beneath dust and metal was a forgotten legend and a chance to finish what someone else never got to. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode might just top this one. The wind kicked up dust as Maya Cruz stood at the edge of the lot, hands on her hips, staring at what she'd just bought. 40 rusted shipping containers, a busted-out trailer office, and enough broken glass to light up the whole desert if the sun hit it right. She adjusted the ball cap on her head and took a slow breath. It smelled like scorched metal and regret. The guy who sold it to her hadn't even tried to hide his smirk. "You really dropping your whole savings on this place?" he asked. "Some girls collect shoes. I collect scrap," she'd shot back. But now, standing there alone, her boots crunching over brittle weeds and forgotten bolts, she felt that uncomfortable throb in her chest. That mix of thrill and panic that only shows up when you do something irreversible. The town had always underestimated her. Glenridge was the kind of place where people still nodded at you from gas stations, where everyone remembered who your daddy was and what trouble you got into in high school. And Maya, well, she was the grease-stained girl who fixed cars behind her uncle's old gas station. Talented, sure, but not someone you bet on. And definitely not someone who should be buying a defunct industrial lot from a foreclosure auction with every penny to her name. But Maya didn't need anyone's permission. She'd spent most of her 20s under hoods and engines, patching up dreams that didn't belong to her. Maybe this lot was her first real shot at making something that did. The paperwork was thin, just a deed transfer and a cryptic inventory list that didn't match anything she could see on site. Containers full of parts, maybe a few old bikes, the auction clerk had shrugged. But no one's opened most of them in years. Might be empty. Might be, she thought. Or they might not. Maya had learned to trust instinct over odds. She could rebuild a transmission blindfolded. But this was different. This was a blank canvas, or a loaded trap. Only time would tell. The sun was already dipping by the time she parked her truck in front of the chain-link gate. The lock screeched open with a reluctant snap, like even it was warning her. She drove in slow, past crooked signs and sun-bleached fencing, past rows of containers leaning like tired giants. Most had been spray-painted or tagged. A few bore shipping codes she didn't recognize. The silence was heavy, not peaceful, but waiting. She cut the engine and sat for a second, the ticking of the cooling metal, the only sound. Then she stepped out. She didn't expect magic. She expected grime, frustration, maybe some salvageable junk to sell for scrap. She'd flip what she could, reinvest, turn this place into a proper shop. That was the plan. But plans were just blueprints. And sometimes, the real story lived behind sealed doors and rusted locks. One of them, she hadn't noticed yet the container at the far end of the yard would change everything. By the third morning, Maya had developed a rhythm, pop the locks, brace for the smell, and hope to find anything worth more than a few bucks. Most of the containers were filled with exactly what you'd expect. Corroded engine parts, old lawnmower frames, rusted-out toolboxes, and one surprisingly intact vending machine filled with ancient cans of Sprite. One unit had a family of rats that scattered the moment she opened the door. Another had piles of tires so dry-rotted they crumbled when she touched them. And yet, she kept going. Gloved hands, aching shoulders, and a tired kind of hope that maybe the next one would be different. It never was. At least, not yet. Maya kept a notebook, jotting inventory numbers and marking what could be flipped. A busted snowmobile frame, a dented compressor, a crate of unopened spark plugs from the 1980s. It was all useless unless you were desperate, and she was. The Arizona sun was brutal that week, and by mid-afternoon each day, sweat soaked the back of her shirt. She drank from a dented thermos and wiped her face with the cleanest rag she could find, watching dust devils swirl between the rows of containers. There were moments she wanted to scream, not from anger, but from the fear that maybe everyone had been right. Maybe she had made a mistake too big to fix. Late one afternoon, she stood inside the 7th container, staring at a pile of tangled wiring like it had personally insulted her. She kicked a metal rod across the floor, and it clanged off the far wall with a hollow ring. "This place is a graveyard," she muttered to herself. She leaned against the cool steel wall, closing her eyes for a moment. In the distance, she heard a hawk cry sharp and solitary. It reminded her how alone she was out here. No crew, no backup. Just a woman with calloused hands, a stubborn heart, and a dream so fragile it felt like glass. But just as she turned to leave the container, something odd caught her eye. A single boot print in the dust, newer than the rest. She paused, crouched down. It wasn't hers. The sole had a unique pattern, almost tactical. She stood quickly, scanning the lot. No one in sight, no cars approaching, nothing but the low hum of silence and heat. Her heart thudded a little faster. This place was supposed to be abandoned. She made a mental note, locked the container, and moved on. It wasn't until the next morning that she noticed a container near the back, darker than the others. It had no graffiti, no spray paint, no tags, just dust and quiet. The lock was different too. Sleeker. Thicker. It wasn't corroded like the others, and something about it felt wrong, new. Maya stepped closer and noticed a faint scratch just beneath the locking mechanism. A line that curved almost like a symbol, something vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. She ran her gloved fingers across the metal, and a chill passed through her palm despite the heat. She didn't know it yet, but that door, that container, was where the real story began. Maya stared at the container like it was daring her. The lock wasn't just newer, it was out of place. Thick, black, with a matte finish that didn't match anything else in the yard. She tugged on it lightly at first, then harder. No give, no rust, no sign it had been weathered by time like the others. It almost looked military. That was the word that kept circling in her head as she inspected it. A military-grade lock on a forgotten container in a junkyard no one wanted? It didn't make sense. She stepped back and shaded her eyes from the sun, scanning the metal exterior. Unlike the others, this one had no markings, no stenciled numbers, no wear. Just a faint emblem, scratched into the steel like someone carved it by hand. She couldn't tell what it was. Part of it was faded, but it looked like a wing, or maybe a bird mid-flight. She didn't like mysteries, not the kind that involved heavy locks and no paper trail. But Maya also didn't walk away from things, especially not when everything inside her said this was important. She pulled her welder from the truck, strapped on her face shield, and fired it up. The torch hissed to life, sparks flying as she sliced through the lock's thick metal throat. It took longer than she expected, almost as if it had been designed to stay shut forever. But finally, with one last crack and a puff of scorched smoke, the lock dropped into the dust. Her heart pounded harder than it had in weeks. This was it. Whatever was inside, she was about to find out. She pried the door open slowly. A wave of heat and dust rolled out like breath from a long-forgotten cave. The sunlight poured in just enough to catch the edge of something curved and metallic inside. She stepped closer, one hand gripping a flashlight, the other trembling ever so slightly. The beam cut through the shadows, and what it revealed made her legs go weak. A car, sleek, low, painted in deep cobalt-blue that still shimmered beneath years of dust. Her breath caught. It was a Porsche, a rare one, the kind you didn't just find in a junkyard. The kind people collected like artwork. She took a shaky step closer, her boots crunching over fine gravel and scattered leaves. There was more. Behind it, she saw a shape covered in tarp red beneath the edges. Another car. Then, another. She counted at least 4 in total, maybe more buried further back in the darkness. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, staring at machines that didn't belong here, didn't belong anywhere near this part of the world. Each had dust on it, sure, but none looked stripped. None looked abandoned. They looked hidden, protected. And as she stepped around the blue Porsche, her eyes caught something taped to the driver's side window. A single manila envelope, thick, yellowed with age. And written across the front in smudged black marker were 7 words that would shift everything. For the one who dares to open. She held the envelope in her hands for a long time before opening it. Something about it felt heavy. Not physically, but in the way old secrets do. She flipped it over, ran her fingers across the tape, and peeled it open. Inside were 3 things: a faded black and white photograph, a folded letter, and a single, modern key fob with a Porsche logo. She stared at the photo first. 2 young men, standing beside what looked like the same blue Porsche in front of her. One had his arm slung around the other's shoulder, both dressed in racing gear, both smiling like they'd just won the world. The photo was dated 2006. On the back, someone had scribbled, "We got this far. Don't let them bury it." Maya unfolded the letter. The handwriting was tight, angled, and written with the kind of intensity you only get when someone is racing a clock. It wasn't a formal will, or some long story. It was a message. A confession. It spoke of 2 brothers who once dreamed of building a custom racing team, not for fame, but to prove something to themselves. To leave a mark. The letter didn't mention names, only initials, LV and MV. It hinted at a betrayal. They pulled funding when we got too close. Said we weren't the right image. And then, we had no choice but to disappear, to hide what we made. These cars aren't just fast, they're one of a kind, untouched. If you're reading this, you were meant to find them. Maya folded the letter slowly, her thoughts spinning. This wasn't scrap metal. This was a secret legacy, a time capsule sealed in steel and dust. She turned back to the Porsche. The curves were perfect. No dents, no missing mirrors. The tires were flat, but the rims looked untouched. She slipped into the driver's seat, the cracked leather creaking beneath her. Everything smelled faintly of gasoline and sun-baked rubber. Her fingers hovered over the ignition. She clicked the fob. Nothing. Dead battery. Expected. But the electronics blinked for half a second, just long enough to show her that the system still had a pulse. She popped the hood and whistled low. The engine bay was immaculate. Not showroom clean, but preserved. Whoever put these cars here knew they'd be found. Maybe not soon, but someday. And maybe by someone like her. She moved through the container, lifting tarps one by one. A red Ferrari 50. A yellow Porsche Carrera GT. A silver car she didn't recognize. At first, low, wide, almost alien in its build. Koenigsegg. Her breath caught. Each car was worth 6, maybe 7 figures. It wasn't just a collection, it was a museum sealed off from the world. But Maya didn't feel rich. She felt haunted. What kind of dream was so precious someone would hide it away forever? She sat on the ground outside the container, as the sun dipped low behind the ridge. Her hands were black with dust. The photo sat on her lap. She looked again at the smiling brothers and whispered to no one, "What happened to you?" The wind picked up, rustling the edges of the envelope. Maya didn't know it yet, but one of those men, the one with the sharper grin and lighter eyes, had vanished 15 years ago, declared dead, and the other had gone completely silent. But now, the silence was breaking. The shop was dark when Maya finally brought the envelope home. She didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, but because of the kind of electricity that only strikes once in a lifetime when mystery meets opportunity. She sat at her small kitchen table, the letter unfolded in front of her, reading and rereading each line. The words weren't desperate, they were deliberate, measured. like someone writing the final page of a story no one else was ever supposed to read. The more she studied it, the clearer it became. These weren't just cars, they were prototypes, private builds, tuned and tested outside any official circuit, made to win something bigger than trophies. Maya stared at the key fob resting beside her coffee mug. It was scuffed, but intact. One of the buttons had a small crack, like it had been pressed 1,000 times too hard. She picked it up, clicked it once. Nothing happened. Of course, there was no car nearby to respond. But in that moment, it didn't matter. That key might as well have been a matchstick, and her life was the powder keg. She knew what came next. She'd have to get the Porsche out, get it powered, and get it running. Not to sell. Not yet. First, she had to know why it was hidden. By morning, she had a plan. She borrowed a portable battery booster from her friend Jay at the parts store, along with a set of diagnostic tools and a promise not to ask too many questions. She didn't tell him what she found. Not yet. Not until she knew she wasn't crazy. Back at the lot, she rolled up the container doors with a slow grind of rusted steel. The morning sun painted the Porsche's curves in soft gold. She opened the hood again and hooked up the booster. Clicked the fob. This time, the dash lit up, faint, flickering but alive. She slipped back into the driver's seat, hands trembling. She tried the ignition. The engine coughed once, then again, then silence. Her heart sank. One more try. This time, she pressed the gas gently as she turned the key. And suddenly, the flat six engine roared to life. Dust blew from the vents. The gauges danced. The air inside vibrated like something had been holding its breath for years and finally exhaled. Maya sat there in stunned silence, tears threatening the corners of her eyes. She wasn't the crying type. Not for heartbreak, not for failure. But this was something else. This was resurrection. A machine built to move, that had been forced to sit in silence for over a decade, and now it was singing again. She shut the engine off, stepped outside, and leaned against the container, her legs shaky. She didn't know what to do next. Sell it? Call the police? Find the owners? None of it felt right. And then she remembered the envelope again. She flipped the letter over. Something was scribbled faintly on the back in pencil coordinates. A location she didn't recognize. Remote, somewhere upstate. And below that, one more line. If the cars are breathing, it means I'm not. Her breath hitched. Suddenly, this wasn't about a jackpot. It was about a ghost story, and it had just begun telling itself through her hands. The engine's echo still haunted Maya's ears as she rolled the blue Porsche out of the container and into the Sunday. It looked like it didn't belong in this world anymore, too perfect, too sculpted, too full of history no one had dared to ask about. She parked it under a tarp near the back of the lot, away from curious eyes. She didn't know who was watching, but something about those coordinates, the untraceable VIN, and the military-grade lock told her not everyone had forgotten this place, and not everyone would want her waking it back up. She spent the next week crawling over every inch of the car. The engine, though dusty, was pristine inside. Custom headers, modified intake. The kind of details only private builders with money and secrets could afford. There were initials engraved on a metal plate near the firewall. L.V. Build 1. Her fingers lingered on them. Luca Ventari. She was almost sure of it now. The letter hadn't used names, but the initials, the disappearance, the whispers of an independent racing project that had gone dark in 2007, it all pointed to one name. A man who'd nearly stolen the podium at Le Mans before vanishing completely. They said he died, but the world has a funny way of hiding the truth when the truth is inconvenient. Word got around town that she'd found something wild in the containers, though no one knew what. Some people assumed it was a hoard of rare parts. Others joked about a meth lab. A few old-timers stopped by just to gawk, trying to see past the tarps. Maya kept her answers vague, and her gates locked. But the energy had shifted. Even Jay from the parts store started asking if she needed help, cleaning up the fancy stuff. But she didn't want help. Not yet. She wanted silence. Time. Understanding. Every night, after the heat let up, she sat in the driver's seat with the door open, staring at the empty container it once called home. She played music through the car's ancient sound system, jazz, mostly, and let the engine hum just loud enough to remind her it was alive. She wasn't restoring a machine. She was decoding a message, one someone had buried in steel and gasoline. One night, just past midnight, she pulled the glove box open again, half expecting it to be empty. But this time, her fingers brushed, something lodged deep in the back, a service manual, thick and leather-bound. Inside, wedged between pages of diagrams and torque specs, was a folded piece of paper. Not handwritten this time, typed. Clean, clinical. On it, GPS coordinates, latitude, longitude, and a name, Sable Ridge. She searched it. An abandoned racetrack 3 hours north, now overtaken by weeds and silence. Her stomach flipped. She didn't know why, but she felt that the next piece of the story was waiting there. Maybe answers, maybe more questions. She closed the glove box, turned the engine off, and leaned back into the seat. The Porsche's cabin was warm, comforting in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't just horsepower she was sitting inside. It was history, memory, and something else. Something that felt eerily like purpose. Sable Ridge wasn't on any modern GPS systems. Maya had to dig through an archived motorsport forum just to confirm it ever existed. Once a private test track for elite European builders, it was shut down after a fire in 2009 and quietly erased from public maps. No press, no lawsuits, just a silence that felt intentional. She packed lightly tools, water, a tire repair kit, and the leather-bound manual with the typed coordinates still tucked inside. She didn't take the Porsche. Not yet. She drove her pickup instead, wanting to see what waited for her before she brought anything precious along. The road was broken and steep, weaving through dry hills and whispering trees that hadn't seen life in years. Her GPS blinked out halfway up the trail, and for a moment, she thought she'd made a mistake. But just before she turned back, she crested a ridge and saw it a massive concrete oval, choked in vines and cracked pavement. The fence was still intact, but someone had pried the gate open years ago. She drove in slowly, tires crunching gravel. The buildings were husks, now control tower half collapsed, garage bays rusted shut, but the track, it still held shape, like a ghost, waiting for someone to chase it. She parked in the center of the lot and walked toward the far garage, the one with the least visible decay. It had a door half ajar, and on it, spray-painted in black, Vone. Her heart jumped. Same code that was etched on the plate under the Porsche's hood, LV build, 1. She pushed the door open slowly. Inside, it smelled like gasoline and old sweat. Dust danced in shafts of light from broken skylights. On the far wall, there was a mural, faded but still legible. 2 silhouettes in racing helmets, one hand raised in victory, the other pointing forward. Between them, the blue Porsche, painted in immaculate detail. This was no ordinary garage. It was a shrine. A place built to remember something the world was told to forget. On the workbench, Maya found a yellowed binder. Inside were laminated test logs, speeds, gear ratios, engine maps. And in the back pocket, a stack of photos, the same 2 brothers from the photo in her envelope. Younger this time, dirt on their faces, smiles that hadn't yet been betrayed. Behind them stood the red Ferrari and the yellow Carrera GT. Every piece confirmed it. This was Luca Ventari's legacy, or at least what was left of it. She pulled out one final sheet from the binder, a scanned letter, signed at the bottom, Luca V. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a challenge. If you found this, it means the cars are still breathing. I don't want revenge. I want resurrection. Make them move again. Make them heard. And when the time comes, bring her back to the track. Maya stood there for a long time, reading the lines over and over. The letter wasn't meant for a collector. It wasn't meant for a thief. It was meant for someone who understood what it meant to build something out of passion and hold on to it, even when the world said let go. She stepped back out into the sunlight, dust in her lungs, and knew with certainty this wasn't about her anymore. It never had been. The phone rang at 3:12 a.m. Maya had been asleep on the couch in her garage office, the blue Porsche parked just outside beneath the floodlight. She nearly ignored it, assuming it was another spam call. But something pulled her upright, the kind of instinct you don't argue with. The number was hidden, no name, no digits. Just unknown caller glowing on the cracked screen. She hesitated, thumb hovering over decline, then answered. The voice was male, old, gruff, and unmistakably deliberate. "You found them, didn't you?" he asked. No hello, no name. Just 6 words that landed like thunder. Maya's mouth went dry. "Who is this?" she whispered. Silence for a beat. Then, "I hoped it would be someone like you." She stood up, heart pounding. "Is this Luca Ventari?" Another pause. Then a low breath, like a ghost exhaling. "They said I was dead," he said. "It was easier that way." Maya sat back down slowly. "Why now?" she asked. "Why me?" His voice didn't waver. "Because you opened the one container no one else dared to touch. And because you brought her back to life." Her hand trembled as she gripped the phone tighter. "I read your letter. I saw the track. I saw the mural." The line stayed quiet, but she could hear the emotion beneath his silence. He wasn't ready to speak about the past. Not yet. "That Porsche," he finally said, "was the first car I ever built without compromise. My brother and I, we put everything into it. Sponsors pulled out when they realized we wouldn't play by their image rules. So we hid it. All of it. And now, you've woken it up." Maya could barely breathe. "The others, the Ferrari, the Koenigsegg, were those yours too?" "Built in secret," he said. "Funded by our own savings. We never got to race them officially. Never even got to finish our first public trial. They called it an accident. It wasn't." His voice darkened. "But this call isn't about the past. It's about what you're going to do next." She swallowed. "What do you want me to do?" A soft chuckle. "Not much. Just one thing. Race her." Maya's eyes widened. "What?" "You heard me," he said. "Find an event, a track, anywhere they still care about the story behind the speed. Make them remember. Not my name. The feeling, the purpose, the sound of something built with soul." "Oh," she leaned forward, the weight of his words settling deep in her ribs. "I'm not a racer," she said. "I've never—" "You're more of one than half the people out there," he cut in. "You fixed her. You felt her breathe again. That's all the training that matters. The rest is just heart." The line crackled. Maya wanted to ask more where he was, why he trusted her, what happened to his brother, but she knew the call was ending. "How do I reach you again?" she asked. Silence. Then, "You don't. But if you really drive her, you'll hear me." The call dropped, and in the silence that followed, Maya looked out at the Porsche, glowing faintly beneath the moonlight. It didn't look like a car anymore. It looked like a promise, one she hadn't made, but was now responsible for keeping. Maya stood at the edge of the starting line, her hands slick with nerves beneath her gloves. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue across the makeshift racetrack, carved out of an old airstrip just south of town. The event wasn't official. It was more of a local underground gathering, mostly tuners, muscle cars, and vintage imports. Nothing fancy, no sponsors. But that's exactly why it felt right. There were no rules here, no politics, just engines, pavement, and guts. And somewhere, miles away, a man named Luca Ventari was probably waiting to hear the hum of his legacy one more time. The Porsche idled beside her, steady and low, like it had been waiting for this moment just as long as she had. She had spent the past 2 weeks prepping it, running diagnostics, tuning the throttle response, adjusting tire pressure by instinct more than data. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't supposed to be. It was alive, and that was enough. She'd named her Ghost Line, after the whispery white pinstripe that ran along the doors, subtle but sharp. The others at the event laughed when she rolled up in it, assuming it was a replica, a museum piece. "Nice toy," one of them smirked. She didn't respond. The engine would speak for her. As she buckled in, she caught a glimpse of the photograph she had taped to the dash, the two brothers side by side, grinning beneath their racing helmets. She whispered to them, like they were riding shotgun. "Let's see what she can do." The starter raised his arm. Engines roared. Maya's heart thudded against her ribs like a jackhammer. And then the flag dropped. The Porsche launched harder than she expected, wheels gripping the asphalt like claws. The others, a Camaro, a tricked-out Miata, and a matte black Skyline pushed ahead early, but Maya didn't panic. She felt the balance in the turns, the raw, unfiltered torque in second gear. By the halfway mark, she'd passed two of them. Her hands moved on instinct, her body locked in sync with the car like they were sharing the same breath. On the final stretch, the Skyline blocked her lane. She dropped a gear, finessed a feint, right then snapped left, cutting past him with inches to spare. She crossed the line first. By half a car length, the crowd erupted. Not in stadium-level noise, but in that quiet kind of awe, when people realize they've just witnessed something real. The guy who'd mocked her walked over later and just nodded. "That wasn't a toy," he muttered. "No," she said. "It was a promise. A reporter from a local racing blog took interest. Snapped photos. Asked questions. Wanted to know where she got the car, if she planned to race again." Maya deflected most of it. She didn't want sponsors, didn't want headlines. She just wanted the engine to speak. Back at the garage, she parked the Porsche under the same floodlight where it had first blinked to life. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she was chasing a mystery. She felt like she was honoring a memory. Autumn settled into Glenridge with soft winds and shorter days. The Porsche Ghostline now rested in the center of Maya's lot, no longer tucked away, but proudly displayed beneath a new awning she'd built herself. People came by just to look. Some knocked on the shop door and asked questions. Others just stood there in silence, like they were in the presence of something sacred. Maya never claimed it. Not in the way collectors do. She always said the car wasn't hers. She was just part of its story. Business had picked up. Not because of the race or the whispers online, but because people saw something in her now, a kind of quiet authority that came from doing the impossible. Parents brought in their kids to watch her work. College students asked for internships. Even Jay from the parts store finally stopped asking what she found in the containers and just started sending better parts without charge. But through it all, Maya stayed grounded. She didn't expand, didn't start a YouTube channel, didn't chase the spotlight. She stayed right there, in the middle of that dusty lot, next to the car that changed everything. And then, one morning, a package arrived. No return address, just a small wooden box, hand-carved, with her name burned into the lid. Inside was a die-cast model of the Porsche, painted in the same cobalt-blue, with the same faint ghost line down the side. Beneath it, a folded note, short, typewritten, and signed with the same initials as before, L.V. Legacy is never about being remembered. It's about leaving something worth finding. Now it's your turn. Hide something. Maya read it 3 times before the meaning fully landed. It wasn't instruction. It was invitation. A way to continue the story, to pass on the spirit of what she'd been gifted. That afternoon, she cleaned out one of the far-back containers, the same size and shape as the one that had once held Ghostline. She painted the walls, swept the dust, and welded a custom plate into the floor, a hidden compartment, just large enough for a small engine component, a photo, and a letter she hadn't written yet. Then, she rolled in a different car. One she'd been quietly restoring on her own time. A beat-up 1984 Datsun 280ZX that her father once owned before he passed. It wasn't worth much, but it was hers, and she had rebuilt every bolt with her own hands. On the door, she painted a single stripe, the same Ghostline in white. She left no note, no map, just a locked door, and a subtle symbol carved into the steel. Weeks passed, then months. The attention faded, as it always does. But the energy didn't. Maya kept fixing, teaching, building. And once a week, she sat on the hood of the Porsche at dusk, just to feel the quiet. She'd run her fingers over the key still dangling from the ignition and whisper, "We did it." Not for the victory, but for the fact that it had all meant something. And one day, maybe years from now, someone will buy this lot, or inherit it, or stumble across that last container at the edge of the yard. They'll crack it open, dust will swirl, and they'll find something waiting for them. Not just a car, not just an engine, but a question. What do you do with a dream someone else never got to finish? Whatever their answer is, Maya Cruz will be part of it.